If you delve deeper into the history of American crime, you will notice that many famous criminals were motivated by very simple motives, namely the thirst for money and power. However, there were exceptions when a person was led to the path of banditry by patriotism, a sense of duty and the fight for his ideals. A striking example of this is the legendary Wild West shooter named Jesse James. During his short life, this man managed to take part in a bloody war, carry out more than 20 serious robberies and become the most wanted criminal in the country. He eluded pursuit, avoided ambushes, and fought against hated federal forces, even when the war was already lost. That is why residents of the American South called him a hero and hid him from the authorities, and musicians composed songs and ballads about the elusive Jamesy. But to understand how a kind, believing blue-eyed boy became a seasoned criminal, you need to go back to the very beginning of his story. Jesse James was born on September 5, 1847 in Missouri. His father Robert graduated from Georgetown College and then became a Baptist preacher. In his city, he was a very respected person and later even became one of the founders of William Jewell College, which, by the way, still exists today. JC's mother Zelda was a graduate of a Catholic school in Lexington. Contemporaries described her as a deeply religious and very sympathetic woman who devoted most of her time to raising children and caring for others. Jesse also had a brother and a sister. As you can easily guess from what was described above, the children grew up in a very religious family, where the highest ideals were instilled in them. However, one cannot fail to mention the fact that the James family owned slaves, as well as their own plantations. These were the characteristics of the American South at that time. Keeping people in captivity was something common and did not cause condemnation from others. But one way or another, JC's childhood, just like other children in the family, was quite calm, and even joyful. They did not need anything, they were surrounded by care and love. This was the case until 1849, when the gold rush began in California. It is at this point that Robert James decides to go south with other gold miners. But he went there not to make money, because he was not interested in profit, but to preach and bring new people to his flock. While on the road, Robert constantly wrote to his family, but in the fall, the letters stopped coming. As it turned out, the man later died immediately upon arrival in California from an unknown illness and was buried in an unmarked grave. For little JC, this was the first serious blow of fate, and he took the loss of his father very hard. A few years later, Ziranda married Benjamin Sims. He was a worthy man and life with the new head of the family went on as usual. But soon he fell from his horse and died. In 1855, Ziranda married again, this time to a prominent doctor named Reuben Samuel, and in another marriage 4 more children were born. Dramatic changes in the life of Jesse James occurred with the outbreak of the American Civil War. His family chose the side of the South, which is not at all surprising. Jesse's older brother Frank was the first to join the ranks of the army of the newly formed Confederation. In just 6 months, he took part in 2 serious companies and turned from a simple farmer into a real warrior. But one day he fell ill with measles, weakened, fought off the detachment and was captured by the Northern troops. There he was faced with a choice, to swear an oath that he would never again take up arms against the forces of the Allied army and go home, or remain in captivity. And naturally Frank promised to return to peaceful life, but in fact he had no intention of keeping his promise. Immediately after he returned to his hometown, he contacted the partisans and joined one of the many resistance units. Over time, Frank was identified and then Northern soldiers visited James' farm. They interviewed JC, as well as his stepfather, but the stepfather, in turn, claimed that he did not know where the partisans were. Then the soldiers decided to get them talking. They beat young Jesse almost to death. But the guy turned out to be mentally and physically strong and did not tell his offenders anything. Then they set to work on Reuben, but he, too, was silent for a long time. However, he gave away the location of the partisans after his wife and younger children came under attack. Of course, the Northerners promised that they would give Frank the opportunity to surrender, but they also did not intend to keep their vows. Moreover, they hanged Dr. Reuben without trial. When the partisan detachment was found, it was fired upon without any warning. Many died, but Frank himself was able to miraculously escape a terrible death and disappeared. After such difficult events, J.C. hated the Northerners even more than before. He, like his older brother, wanted to join the army or join the partisans, but his age did not allow him to do this. Nevertheless, when the guy was 16 years old, he came to the recruiters, signed up for the resistance and joined his brother's detachment. In 1864, the James brothers decided to take revenge on everyone who was involved in the torture and oppression of their family. The first to come under attack was Brant Lebon, the man who supported the Northerners, and who actually led the soldiers to the James house. His brothers waylaid him on the street and shot him point blank. Then they dealt with Elvis Dagley. The brothers broke into his house, dragged him outside and shot him in front of everyone. In order to somehow survive and continue partisan activities, the brothers were engaged in robberies of the Northerners and those who supported them in one way or another. J.C. caught his first bullet at the age of 17, but fortunately they were able to get it and the boy himself quickly recovered. A little later, he managed to shoot his middle finger on his left hand while cleaning his own revolver. By the way, because of this, his older brother made fun of him for the rest of his life. Closer to autumn, the James brothers joined the detachment of William Anderson, nicknamed Bloody Bill. J.C. and Bill's squad raided a town called Centralia in Missouri. The partisans plundered the local arsenal and then stopped a train that was approaching the city. He was guarded by 24 Union soldiers, but they could not cope with the detachment of Southerners and died after 30 minutes of battle. To stop the Bloody Bill group, a detachment of 150 people moved out from a neighboring city. They overtook the retreating partisans and a firefight ensued. This was Jesse's first serious combat, and he proved himself to be a good shot. During the battle, he, on horseback, was able to get close to the commander of the Northerners and killed him with an accurate shot to the head. After this, panic began in the ranks of the Federals and the partisans won a complete victory. Then there were other meetings with Federal forces and the Bloody Bill died from them. Left without a commander, the detachment retreats to North Texas to spend the winter. In the spring, Jesse James returns to Missouri with his brother, but accidentally stumbles upon a patrol. During the shootout, he is wounded in the chest and miraculously escapes. The wound was severe and the brothers could not hide in the forests for long. Jesse had to go to his native farm to heal his wounds and generally somehow come to his senses. He could not hide his presence for long and therefore appeared at the local administration, informing him that the war was over for him. Naturally, he swore allegiance to the United States, but as you probably already guessed, he again had no intention of keeping these vows. Jesse's older brother did exactly the same thing a few weeks later. The end of the war was marked by the defeat of the South and the victory of the North, respectively. Naturally, for many, such an outcome was simply unacceptable, and Jesse was no exception. For several months he was visiting his uncle and there he met a girl, by the way, with her he would spend the rest of his life. But J.C. could not sit idle for long, and therefore went to Clay County, where he found comrades with whom he fought against the Northerners. After consulting, they came to the conclusion that the war ended for the politicians, not for them, and resistance could be waged despite the signed documents. That is why on February 13, 1866, J.C. and his gang robbed a bank in the city of Liberty and their jackpot was approximately $6,000, which at that time was simply a huge amount. Some historians claim that J.C. did not directly participate in this robbery, but only helped plan it. Others are already saying that he was with his accomplices. But one way or another, everyone agrees that on December 7, 1869, J.C. and his brother not only robbed a bank but also eliminated a man named Samuel Cox, who in turn was responsible for liquidating the Bloody Bill. State authorities were able to find out that the James brothers were behind the crimes described above, and therefore they were outlaws and set a reward for their capture. Then the James brothers robbed stagecoaches, small bank branches and various commercial organizations. Over time, Jesse gains the reputation of an elusive man who fights for his cause, no matter what. Many people in the South are beginning to cover him, and even openly support him. By the way, some call Jesse James the Robin Hood of his time, but in fairness it should be noted that there is no serious evidence that he distributed the stolen money to ordinary people, just as there is no evidence to the contrary. In any case, he was a symbol of resistance, and from time to time new people joined the ranks of his gang. Such activity attracted more and more attention from the authorities. They even sent soldiers to eliminate him, but it was all to no avail. The James brothers easily evaded pursuit and were always 3 steps ahead of their pursuers. In order to somehow resolve the issue with the elusive criminal, even people from the Pinkerton agency were involved in the case. They were real professionals and masters in the field of catching criminals, but they also could not beat Jesse. Already in 1873, the James gang robbed a train and took $2,000, and a little later the level of their activity increased to the point that they even robbed 2 stagecoaches a day. But in 1876, Jesse's luck turned away. While attempting to rob the First National Bank, they were ambushed by police and Pinkerton agents. Some of the accomplices were killed on the spot, and some were arrested. Only the James brothers could escape. They spent the next 3 years checking rather secretly. But in 1879 the gang was reassembled, thereby starting a new series of crimes. From that moment on, the bandits not only robbed, but also derailed trains and also attacked government employees. One must also take into account the fact that Jesse's former gang consisted of people who had known each other for a long time. They had been through a lot together and could trust each other. But this couldn't be said about the new gang either. On the 3rd of April 1882, one of the members of Jesse's gang named Robert Ford shot his leader at the moment when he took off all his weapons and turned his back to correct the picture. Jesse died within minutes in his wife's arms. Most likely you will ask yourself, why did he do this? Well, in fact, Robert Ford and his brother Charlie wanted to receive a reward from the state authorities, and also to become famous, because they were able to kill Jesse James himself, but fate decreed otherwise for them. First, they never received an award from the governor. Secondly, local residents began to openly despise the Ford brothers, and also make their lives miserable in every possible way. 3 years later, Charlie could not stand the moral pressure and committed suicide. Robert moved to another state. There he opened a bar, and for a moment it even seemed to him that everything was getting better. But one day a man named Edward Kelly walked into his establishment and said, "Hello, Bob." After which he immediately pulled out a pistol and shot him right in the face. Standing next to Bob is the bartender, to whom Edward Kelly said the following. This was for his vile betrayal of Jesse James. Then he spat on his body and left the room. Jesse's funeral was quiet, and on his tombstone it was written, "Here lies Jesse James, died April 3, 1882. Killed by traitors and a coward whose name is unworthy of mention." Here's another interesting fact: after Edward Kelly committed his crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. But within a few months, the state leadership received a petition for commutation of punishment, which was signed by more than 7,000 people. Also, residents of a number of states decided to perpetuate the memory of Jesse James and created a museum in the Sam Joseph House. In addition, he became the main character for a number of books and films. In general, we can say that the memory of this legendary criminal is alive to this day.